All right. Well, we're a minute past our start time, so we will get started. It's good to see everyone here. Thank you for joining us, um, especially the week before Christmas. We appreciate having anybody still paying attention. So thank you. Before we introduce our esteemed guests today, we will just go over some Zoom norms. Well, first of all, welcome. You're participating in the second ever Walker Civics Symposium. My name is Devin Weiser. I'm the director of the Walker Institute. Also on, we have our Walker Academic Director, Leah Murray, and Becky Stromberg, who's our admin here. So we're all just thrilled that you can all join us. Thank you. So first, yes, for Zoom norms, please mute yourselves. Otherwise, we'll have to do it for you. And I suggest also putting on speaker view to have fewer distractions while our guests are speaking. Feel free to message Leah if you have any questions regarding the Zoom. Finally, if you have any content questions on the topic at hand, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll try and read it off as the symposium progresses. Obviously, we'll try and keep it, to a certain time and subject matter constraints. Now, for the exciting part, our guests today, who are going to be giving their perspective on Hill Air Force Base and what it means for our community and for the world. We have two esteemed guests. Only one is on right now, so hopefully the other one jumps on shortly. But for now, Kevin Sullivan, you're holding down the fort here. Kevin Sullivan, I mean, where do I begin really? But he's a retired Air Force Major General, commissioned through the Air Force ROTC program following graduation from the University of Connecticut in 1974. He's the former director of the Reconnaissance Systems Program Office, former commander of the Ogden Air Logistics Center at Hill Air Force Base, retired from the Air Force in November of 2008 in the grade of Major General, currently serves as the executive director of the Utah Defense Alliance. He got his Bachelor of Science from the University of Connecticut, Master of Science in Personnel Management from Central Michigan University, Air Command and Staff College, Air War College, Pennsylvania State College Advanced Management Program, and Harvard Business School General Managers Program. So you can pretty much ask him anything and he'll be able to help us out. So Tage Flint, he is not on that I can see yet, but he should be jumping on shortly. And Tage Flint, he is an expert on a couple of things that I have dealt with him a lot in the past. First, on water stuff. He is the general manager and CEO of the Weber Basin Conservancy District, Water Conservancy District. But he also has all the military background as well. He's a member of the Air Force Chief of Staff Civic Leader Program, president of the Utah Defense Alliance Board of Directors. He's the vice chair for the top of the Utah Military Affairs Committee. He's the Utah National Guard Honorary Colonel, Hill Air Force Base Wingman of the Year honoree, civil engineer. He has a civil engineer degree from the University of Utah with an MBA from Western Governors University. So we are extremely lucky to have both of them joining us today, and Tage's administrative assistant says he's getting on right now. So in the meantime, we are honored to have Kevin Sullivan with us. Mr. Sullivan. Oh, there's Tage. How are you?
Here I am.
That's okay. Tage, you missed your introduction, so you're just going to have to trust that we said nice things. Okay.
Right. You can't do anything about it
now. Okay, good. But I'd just like to kick off this program by, I just did your introductions, but if you both wouldn't mind just telling us your background specifically in regards to Hill Air Force Base and what you've done in and around the base and when that started for you, just in a little more detail than I just went over with the bios. Kevin, if you wouldn't mind with leading off, that'd be great.
Sure. Sure. Actually, my first trip to Hill Air Force Base was in about 1984. And I was the action officer putting together a conference for basically the senior logistician in the Air Force. And that was about a 3-day visit. But my real affiliation with Hill began in about 1992. I was assigned here for the first time as a colonel at the time. Spent about 3.5 years in a couple of different jobs on Hill, a couple of senior leader jobs on Hill. And then went off and did some other things for about 8 years, and then somewhat to my surprise and great happiness, I was called back in 2003 to be the commander of what was then the Ogden Air Logistics Center. And as I recall in my acceptance speech, if you will, that day when I accepted the command, I advised that I was the happiest Major General in the Air Force. And I was, in fact, the happiest Major General in the Air Force to be coming back to Hill Air Force Base. Since then, I've been involved with the Utah Defense Alliance, the top of Utah Military Affairs Committee, and a number of other activities around the base. I've also proud to be a former trustee at Weber State University. Probably one of my most favorite assignments, if you will, since I've been back. But affiliation with Hill going back to the early 90s, and pretty much other than about a 7-year hiatus, I've been involved with Hill ever since.
That's great. And then you decided to make Utah your home permanently, right?
We did. We had lots of friends here from 2 assignments here, and I'm a skier.
Yes.
So that brought us back, and we are really pleased to be back here.
That's great. Great. Tage, can you tell us a little bit more? Okay.
Yeah, good afternoon. Again, apologies, had a little technical issue on our end here, but
that's all right. That's sort of the world we live in this year,
well,
right?
and it's not like I don't have 15 Zoom calls a day. It's just that for some reason I had to go.
That's all right.
No, I get the question all the time that why would the general manager of the Water Authority in Northern Utah have so much to do with the military in the state? And that's kind of a long story, but I won't bore you with. But the fact of the matter is, because we are a water agency and a wholesaler of water throughout the region, we have as our single largest located customer Hill Air Force Base. We deliver a ton of water to them each time, and then we also deliver water out to the Utah Test and Training Range as well. And so inherently we had interest in what they do on a business model, but much more than that is the fact that I grew up in this area, and if you grow up in this area and as old as I am, you know that we all have neighbors, relatives, uncles, aunts, or even closer relatives that have had their careers at Hill Air Force Base as civilians. And then on top of that, I was able to work at Hill Air Force Base while I was in engineering school as a engineering intern for a couple of years as well. So my interest has just always been there from childhood up. And then as I've been in the business world in Northern Utah now for a very long time, I realized just what kind of a economic engine Hill Air Force Base is and what it brings to the community. It's significant, it's large, and almost irreplaceable. It's in terms of the economy of Northern Utah. And so, of course, we would be very interested in being sure that it thrives and continues to grow and is here to stay. And so with all those reasons, I joined Utah Defense Alliance board some 20 years ago. A dozen years ago or so, I was asked to be the president, and I've done that since then, and very much enjoyed it for a couple of reasons. One is we work with volunteers as a Utah Defense Alliance board, and these are the community movers and shakers and leaders who are every bit as much or more interested in all of this than I am, and contribute a tremendous amount of their own time to this effort. And then the other reason is I get to work with General Sullivan, who is just a wealth of information in terms of Air Force goings on, and specifically to the business model that's going on at Hill Air Force Base. And so it's been a great privilege.
That's great. Yeah. Well, as everyone can see that's watching, I mean, both of you are extremely qualified to be, commenting and talking with us today about the importance of Hill Air Force Base. So we have a variety of questions today, some of which come from our team here at the Walker Institute. Some come from our Weber State's economic director, Guy Latender, who you may know. And then, of course, I'll just put this out there again as people are watching. If you have any questions as things come up, please put it in the chat and I'll do my best to get to them. But first, we'll start out from a question from Guy Latender. He says, looking ahead, what are our state's biggest challenges to keep the presence of Hill Air Force Base as it is today? What do we need to be aware of to either improve or maintain, at least, to not lose work or the fighter squadron? So what are our biggest challenges to keep the presence of Hill Air Force Base, and how do we make it grow in the state? it's a very broad question. So, I mean, go in any direction and there's no time limit. So.
Well, it's a good question, and General Sullivan can tell you a lot more about this. But just from a general perspective, I'll tell you, and I already mentioned the fact that it's such a large economic driver here that the question is legitimate and important. Hill Air Force Base has all sorts of tenants on it, and some of which are the fighter wings that have been here for a long time, and the ones that we see visibly more than anything else as the planes fly overhead. But the depot or the center that's here for maintenance of aircraft is by far the biggest employer on the base. And then there's all sorts of what I call white collar jobs, from contracting and other type technical jobs that exist on the base as the civilian workforce rounds out with other tenants there. I think there's a couple of keys to making sure that continues. One of them is diversification. We make sure that there are, and do what we can at least in encouraging the Department of Defense of placing missions here that are meaningful and frankly are job creators for the community, and then maintaining the ones that exist here now and promoting their growth along the way. It's quite the array of types of jobs and activities going on the base. So the fighter wing, as operators of aircraft, they look at the world entirely different than the maintainers do in the depot. And so I think that diversification is good. I didn't even mention the mission of missile development and maintenance here, which is huge and less noticeable or visible to the general public, but hugely important going forward. And then the other part of it is to maintain the kinds of jobs and missions we want here is to be sure that we are advocating the right kinds of education for our children and our college students, so that they may be ready and we can fill the billets as they come up for needs on workforce. It's on us to be able to have enough folks ready and willing to work for the United States Air Force or other military installations, and have the right credentials to do so. And their demand is high, and the outlook is good as long as we can fill the jobs as they are created here in the state. Mm-hmm. Kevin?
Yeah. I'd preface my remarks by saying that if there's I don't think we should be concerned about the viability or lifespan of Hill Air Force Base. I think generally speaking, it's in a really solid place for a lot of reasons. But I would address this from a community perspective, and I would say that if we want to keep Hill Air Force Base here for the long term, then a lot of it has to do with community support. Tage already talked about the education needs of the base. They hire hundreds and hundreds of employees every year. For example, they hire 200 software engineers every year. And so it's incumbent upon the state to help produce those 200 software engineers a year, in addition to the mechanics, to the composite technicians, to the contracting officers that they hire on the base. So one of the things we can do, clearly, as Tage mentioned, is from an education standpoint. Another big deal is encroachment. Tage mentioned the 388th Fighter Wing. One of the reasons they're here is because we have the Utah Test and Training Range just west of the base. So keeping that a viable range, keeping that a range that can accommodate our newest aircraft and our newest missile systems is important to us. Encroachment around the base is important to us. There's a study going on right now that involves all of the towns and cities surrounding the base, which will identify those compatible use activities that can take place around the base, and also identify those activities that ought not be taking place around the base. For example, you don't want a church or a school off the south end of the runway in Layton where you have aircraft taking off all the time. So from a community standpoint, I think it's just to continue the kinds of support that's been provided to that base for the past 40 years in terms of education, in terms of encroachment, and those types of things. So I'll just leave it at that. But I think that's what the community can do to help keep the base viable.
Okay, no, that's great. both of those comments are fantastic. Can we back it up a little bit, actually? Because I've noticed in talking with people, a lot of them, just their knee-jerk reaction is to support Hill Air Force Base, which is good. I think we need to continue that. But when you actually start talking with them about what's going on at the base, a lot of people really have no idea what's going on. They like the sound of freedom, which is great. We get that all the time, and that's exciting. But beyond that, they don't really know what's happening. Can you mentioned the fighter wings, you mentioned the depot work and the missile development. Can you get into each of those a little bit, into just a little more detail into each of those, just explaining it to a layperson, so that the non-military mind can understand what's happening?
Well, that's my area of expertise, the non-military and what that means. But as I've been able to study this and be involved in so many programs on the base, I've earned a better understanding and appreciation for what goes on there. And to your point, Devin, of what it means to our community, it's interesting to me. And General Sullivan will have a lot more to say about this, but it's interesting to me to find out that, for instance, the one thing that we see are the fighter planes passing overhead all the time. That activity here is in support of the defense of the nation, and deserves all the support we can give them, because overall, and what I've learned in being on the Air Force wide CLP, the Community Leader Program and Civic Leader Program and other things, is that we should, and we do here, care about the Air Force at large and the Air Force ability to protect the nation. And we should always put that in front of even Utah's needs. And we get a lot of respect and opportunities for conversation in the Air Force, because that is our approach. We make sure that the Air Force is taken care of in its largest sense. But getting back to the fighter wings, even though we see them all the time, they have very little to do with the employment of civilians in our community. They have a few, but not very many. And then we have the reservists that work in the 419th Fighter Wing that are community members. But boy, the vast majority of the jobs reside elsewhere on the base, not with the fighter wings. And that was something that was interesting to me when I first started to realize that. The job growth is on the base. Here's the good news: the job growth on the base is job growth that what I call family sustaining jobs, with the software that General Sullivan mentioned already. There'll be a large civilian workforce, either for the Air Force or for defense contractors on the missile mission that's about to embark here. And these are highly technical, highly trained folks with great salaries and benefits that come with them. Can I give you one quick comparison?
Please, yes.
We have a long time have tried to help the Air Force in recruiting the right types of computer software folks, whether that's software engineers or code writers or whatever, to the base to work on these high technical and a lot of times secret type weapon systems. Adobe and the other high-tech folks down on Silicon Slopes in Utah County have done a great job in recruiting these young college graduates that have these types of skill sets. What we could do better, frankly, is put them in a position where they would want to work on the most highly advanced weapon systems in the world. This is gee whiz video game stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And it ought to be cooler for a college student to want to work on that than work on software at Adobe, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the biggest carrot of all is the fact that these jobs are better in terms of pay and benefit and retirement and the like than their competitors down south. We just have to do a better job at getting that word out so that there isn't a deficit in hiring, which they sometimes have on base, of the right kinds of candidates.
Okay, no, that's fascinating perspective. And a lot of people don't realize how competitive we are with Silicon Slopes. I think they do a great job of branding down there.
Yeah, more power to them. Still Utah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's Utah, which is good, but yeah, we're a little biased up here towards northern Utah. So, yeah. Kevin, what do you have to add to that?
So I guess just in terms of, Hill 101, first of all, there's about 22,000 people that work out there. A little over half of those are Air Force civilians who are on the Air Force payroll as civilian employees. About 4,000 of active duty people. About 1,200 are reservists, and Tage has already talked about the reservists that fly the F-35s. And there's about 4,000 contractors on base that do everything from mow lawns to software development work. So pretty extensive range of folks there. Biggest organization on base is the Ogden Air Logistics Complex. That's where the software developers reside. There's about 1,500 of those. And the rest of them do heavy maintenance on F-35s, F-22s, F-16s, A-10s, and C-130s. And they do a lot of maintenance on the components that make up those airplanes, the black boxes, if you will, that make up those airplanes. That's about 7,000 or 8,000 people are on the base, so by far the largest organization on the base. Tage has talked about the 2 fighter wings that are really make up a relatively small population of the base, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 folks in those 2 organizations. Then there's a large number of people on the base that do program management kinds of work. The F-16 is managed for the Air Force out of Hill Air Force Base. The Minuteman III weapon system, ICBMs, are managed out of Hill Air Force Base. The replacement for the Minuteman III, the ground-based strategic deterrent, is also managed out of Hill Air Force Base. And they manage the A-10. They manage just a large number of programs, and there's about 2,000 people doing that. Also, a large number of people doing supply chain management for various components throughout the Air Force. And then, of course, there's the 75th Air Base Wing, which is kind of the city management part of the base that kind of runs the base. They take care of the grass, and they take care of the gates, and they take care of the people on the base, if you will. So large number of activities that occur out there that aren't necessarily transparent to people outside the gate because you don't see them flying around in the air. But that pretty much is the makeup of Hill Air Force Base today. Once again, about 22,000 people work on the base.
Yeah, which is incredible. Those numbers are just so important to know and understand being in this community. One thing that you just mentioned is the replacement for the Minuteman III, the ground-based strategic deterrent missile system. Can you get into that and tell us, the contract was recently acquired by Northrop, is my understanding. If you can talk to us a little bit about that and what that means for Hill Air Force Base's future.
Sure. The contract that was just led is the engineering and manufacturer design contract for the ground-based strategic deterrent. It's about a $13.3 billion contract, and that will make up part of what looks to be about an $80 billion program over the life of the system, which will go on for the next 20 or 30 years. Northrop Grumman is, I think a lot of people know, are doing a lot of building outside the North Gate, outside the Roy Gate. They've got 1 facility complete, 2 facilities under construction. And so they've moved their headquarters, if you will, for that program to outside of Hill Air Force Base. And that wasn't necessarily a given. The state did a good job in trying to attract them there. And so obviously not all of that $13.3 billion is going to be spent in the state of Utah, but the fact that Northrop Grumman has their headquarters here means that a fairly good sized chunk will be spent in the state of Utah. Looks to be about between 3,000 and 4,000 Northrop Grumman employees who will inhabit those 4 buildings, just right next to the Hill Air Force Base Museum today. And there'll be some number of subcontractors that will relocate as well. We don't know at this point how many, but I would guess you're probably looking at somewhere between the 5,000 and 6,000 range in terms of additional employment in northern Utah as a result of that contract. And what that contract will do is it will completely replace the Minuteman III system that's been out there for about 40 years. They'll use existing silos that'll be upgraded. They'll use existing launch control centers that will be upgraded. So the footprint will look relatively the same as it does today for the Minuteman III, but it'll be a completely new weapon system when all is said and done.
Okay, and tell us exactly what that weapon system would do if it were ever used or enacted.
Well, they're
they're
intercontinental ballistic missiles, and they have nuclear warheads. And in the event of a nuclear war with somebody, they would be launched and based on targeting that's done in what's something that's called the Single Integrated Operations Plan, the SIOP, and they'll be launched at predetermined locations and wherever the bad guy is. And so that's the purpose of them.
Okay.
The other thing they do for us, quite frankly, is they make targeting for an enemy really problematic because there's 400 sites that would have to be targeted, plus probably another 50 launch control centers that would have to be targeted by an enemy in order to take out that part of our nuclear component, if you will. So it's largely there as a deterrent. We hope we never have to use it. But if we do, that's the purpose of it. And the other purpose is it creates some real targeting nightmares if anybody should determine they want to attack the United States.
Okay. No, that's good to know. And then just one last question on GBSD. It's part of the nuclear triad. A lot of people talk about how maybe it's less necessary than the other two parts. Can you talk about that a little bit and explain kind of what the other two parts are and why this complements them?
Sure. Well, I mean, the other two parts are air breathers. It's our bombers. It's our B-2s and B-52s. And then we have some fighter aircraft that also carry nuclear weapons. And then there's the sea-launched, our SLBMs, our submarine-launched ballistic missiles, make up the three legs of the triad. So there's an air component, a sea component, and then a ground component, which is the ICBMs. And they all bring a little bit something different to the triad, if you will. Aircraft, if you launch them and you want to call them back, you can call them back. So they're pretty flexible in terms of how you would employ aircraft with nuclear weapons on them. Submarines are pretty hard to detect. There is no technology today that can detect submarines. So they may be the most survivable leg of our triad. ICBMs are the most responsive. They also have the highest alert rates. Alert rates for ICBMs are about 99%. So at any given time, 99% of our ICBMs are ready to be deployed. That's not true for submarines, and that's not true for aircraft. And the other thing that I mentioned before is if you only had an air breather, if you only had aircraft, you only had submarines, then you'd have a fairly limited number of nuclear targets that an opponent would have to attack to disable our nuclear enterprise. If you throw 400 different missile sites on top of that, 400 silos on top of that, with multiple launch control centers, it really complicates targeting for an opponent. So those are kind of what the three legs of the triad, at least in my estimation, bring to it. I am not a triad expert, but that pretty much, I think, composes the current thinking on the nuclear triad.
Okay.
Devin, if I can add just one thing from a civilian perspective here,
please.
And I've learned a ton over the last few years as I've actually been out in the missile fields in Montana and been down in the Minuteman at 3 silo and looked at things. There's a couple of things to note here. One is this GBSD program is not too soon by any means. The missiles that we now have are decades and decades old. There's everything from as simple as corrosion to technological problems that are occurring in those missile fields, and they definitely need to be replaced if they're going to have the same deterrent possibilities as they've had in the past. And so, and I think that is the most important word of the acronym GBSD is the last one, is deterrent, and that's how military leaders largely look at the ballistic missile arsenal, and that is it's a deterrent for further escalation into war type activities worldwide. I've been able to read a couple books on things such as brinksmanship, which means that nations are willing to take certain issues to the brink, but they don't go over that brink because of the nuclear arsenal that is held by not only us, but other world powers. And nobody wants to see that be the end game. And so, there's an argument to be made that even though they are weapons of mass destruction and they are incredibly lethal to a lot of people, it's very much a peacetime creating type of an arsenal. And the other thing I'd mention is by percentage of the Department of Defense budget that goes to all the different services in the DoD. This is in single digits in 2% or less of the entire budget to keep this arsenal alive and have the benefits that go with it. And so, as a economic piece for war deterrent, this is probably as good a deal as there is.
That's great. I appreciate both of your perspectives on that. I want to circle back to something that Tage, you had said earlier. You said, as long as we can fill the jobs, that's going to become so crucial. And that's in my last position. Whenever I was interfacing with the Air Force, that was always the issue up here at Hill, is making sure that we had the qualified people to fill the jobs. So that leads to a question that we got in the chat, actually, that says, how can Weber State help meet the education needs of Hill Air Force Base moving forward? Where should we focus our efforts to build training classes, et cetera? Anything along those lines? I don't know who wants to take a stab at that first.
We probably both want to
Yeah.
for a minute, but the number one is congratulations are in order for Weber State, and the fact that they have moved the needle more, I think, than any of the other Utah universities in filling the needs of the types of jobs that are needed on Hill Air Force Base. And I know that's partly because they're the most local university, but congratulations to them. The creation of the electrical engineering program is a big deal. As a civil engineer myself, I have long advocated that Weber State ought to be an engineering school, and I really hope it doesn't stop there, just with the electrical side of the world. I would love to see Weber continue down that path of getting more engineering degrees going forward, because we need them in all sectors. My water business needs them desperately. And so Weber has moved the needle already. To answer the question, what can be done more? I think it's a partnership with knowing exactly what kinds of missions are here and what may come here from the DoD perspective, and making sure that we have the right curriculums in place. And that's really hard to do. Weber State, again, has been more nimble than the other universities in being able to create programs. And I'm sure Kevin will want to talk about the technical colleges as well, which is another big important piece to this we ought to talk about. But as far as Weber State goes, best deal in the state, and I'm biased in I have two sons that moved on to master's and doctorate degrees after getting their bachelor's degree at Weber State. I'm the biggest fan there is. Not a better launch pad for those that want advanced degrees, not a better place to get one to get a job. And so again, congratulations to Weber, but certainly want to stay nimble and adjust to what's coming.
Yeah, Tage, we got to get you on our marketing team. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I love all that. That's fantastic.
Put me on your ad anytime you want.
Kevin, no pressure. How can you top that? No.
I would echo what Tage said about Weber State. I mean, Weber State has been, it isn't even comparable in terms of how responsive they've been to the needs of not just the base, but I think of the local community's education needs, and clearly the technical education associated with the engineering school that we have at Weber State now has been really important. And I know that has grown, I think, quicker and faster and larger than any of us ever anticipated. So once again, congratulations for that. Congratulations for the engineering buildings that are going up, one on Weber State and the Weber campus and one at the Davis campus. That Davis campus has been a big deal to Hill Air Force Base. You wouldn't think that people would be turned off by driving all the way from Hill Air Force Base to the Weber campus, but the fact of the matter is, if you're trying to do it over a lunch hour, or if you're trying to do it over some sort of a break in your day, that Davis campus has made a big difference for Hill Air Force Base. I know that President Mortensen has announced some other partnerships with Hill Air Force Base downtown, and I think those need to continue. Tage mentioned the technical colleges, Davis Technical College and Ogden Weber Technical College. I'll just point out that they've been equally responsive to Hill Air Force Base. There's a composite facility that went up at Ogden Weber a couple of years ago, where in fact they asked one of the senior engineers at Hill to get down to the legislature and help advocate for that composite facility because of the composite work they do out there. So I would simply say that technical education is going to become more and more important on Hill Air Force Base, both from the tech colleges and from Weber State. And the more that Ogden Weber Applied Technical College and Davis Technical College and Weber State can respond to those needs and continue to partner with the base, I think the better we're going to be. And I know those partnerships thrive today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will keep that going. Appreciate that. And it's sort of fun for me to sit here, you guys congratulating Weber State through me. I've only been here a month, so I can't really take any credit, but I'm surrounded by great people up here who have been putting in the work and getting it done. And I just hope to be able to continue or help them continue that in my little way. But I appreciate those comments. Thank you. We had another question come in. What is the added value of the proximity of the fighter jet training ranges to Hill Air Force Base? So it kind of circles back to my earlier comment. When you ask, the average person on the street, they may not know all of what goes on at Hill Air Force Base. Well, I feel like that especially applies to places like the Utah Test and Training Range. But how does one affect the other? And why? Yeah, why? So why are they important to Hill Air Force Base? And what goes on there too for people?
Well, I mean, it is the Utah Test and Training Range is predominantly a test range. It's part of the test range complex for the Department of Defense. And so in addition to Hill Air Force Base using that range, we have people come in from all over the country that use that range.
Yeah.
And it is the largest overland range in the United States. It's the only range that's possible of accommodating certain tests, particularly certain tests associated with F-35 type aircraft, what we call fifth generation aircraft. So it has really a bigger responsibility than just training the pilots at Hill Air Force Base. There's testing, they accommodate testing from all over the country. They also accommodate international testing periodically out at the range. In terms of the how it benefits the 3D8th and the 419th Fighter Wings, that really can be described just in terms of how long it takes to get there and how long it takes to get back. I mean, it's a pretty efficient sortie when you can come out of your pattern and travel about 2 minutes and you're on the range. So it's a very efficient way to do training for the pilots on base. It also offers great target sets out there for them, great threat emitters out there for them, so they can simulate being in a contested environment. So I would say proximity, the nature of the threat emitters out there, the nature of the targets out there, the fact that it represents terrain that you see all over the world. I mean, it's not a super flat range. There's mountains out there. There's valleys out there. There's all sorts of geography out there. So it is, I mean, when people call it a national asset, they're not underestimating. It really and truly is a national asset that our pilots out at Hill Air Force Base have access to after a very short flight on a daily basis.
Yeah, 2 minutes is not.
Right. I would only offer that, we still have to keep our eye on the ball in terms of encroachment on that range. And it's not just building, it's spectrum encroachment, it's glare encroachment in some cases from solar farms are the kinds of things that can cause us to degrade the capabilities of the range.
Okay.
I just add, Devin, to that Kevin's correct. When you go to the Pentagon and you talked about folks who are not tied to Utah at all, and you're just talking about missions and about what's important to what assets are important to the Air Force, the Utah Test and Training Range is at the top of their list. I mean, you hear national asset, national treasure. I used to hear national treasure all the time and think, you ever been out there? It's, you're lucky to find some sagebrush somewhere, but to the military complex, it is absolutely it's a prerogative to keep it there because of all the reasons that General Sullivan just mentioned. And I'll say this, that the encroachment piece is one that we've spent a lot of time trying to protect, and solar farms that Kevin just mentioned. We have a major interstate that runs through the middle of it, I-80, and then the world that I live in, we deal with endangered species and other environmental type concerns that we have one of the largest dead seas in the Great Salt Lake in the world that's out there, and all the balancing that needs to take place there to be sure that nothing's lost in the process, but that we can still maintain and preserve that test and training range is going to be important. And it's not an easy ask. And our delegation spends a considerable amount of time, as Devin would know, in trying to protect that range for its uses.
Absolutely. Which sort of leads to my next question involving BRAC. Can you sort of explain what BRAC is, and do you think there's any risk associated with BRAC as far as Hill Air Force Base goes moving forward, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll say, I know General Sullivan can give you some details here. He's been through many of them.
Yeah.
I will say this, the genesis of the Utah Defense Alliance was that of a BRAC issue that was in the mid-90s that was, it seemed imminent. And some will point out it was within months of happening to Hill Air Force Base, where there would be a base closure and a realignment of their assignments, and which would have been incredibly devastating to the economy here. And that community advocacy that came out of that is what is our formation of the Utah Defense Alliance, by another name, but it's the same group today that advocates for these things. I think we're more sophisticated now and not so myopic on a BRAC, and here's why. Kevin mentioned this earlier. The base realignment and closure process still exists if it's authorized by Congress. Yep. And it's a political football, to say the least, each time as it comes up. But a lot of times the military services want them because they're spread out too thin in some bases and are spending too much money, valued budget money that they could use somewhere else on missions. And so, but having said all of that, there are only 3 ALCs, complexes in the Air Force system that maintain aircraft. There's only one place where the GBSD missile system is going to be developed. We're standing very well against any kind of a BRAC talk right now. Don't ever want to take that for granted, but I think the truth of it is we're probably not that threatened by it right now. It's not to say that certain missions won't get moved, though, and I think within that bigger picture, there are missions that we want to protect here to protect the jobs. And I'll say one other thing. If we did along with the University of Utah earlier, and now with the Ken Gardner Center, some studies to show impacts of the base on the state. And one of them is, and one number just one number to remember is north of $9 billion per year. And with our new study, Kevin, I think we're going to be well above 10 billion, or if not 11, of the state's economy comes out of this defense complex and all the defense and military missions here in Utah. It's not to be trifled with. It could hurt the statewide if something were to happen to one of the large installations. The earliest study we did with the University of Utah did it in terms of what kinds of years would it take to recover economically for each county if Hill Air Force Base were to close. Salt Lake County, surprisingly, was over a decade to recover economically if it were to close. Davis County was 25 to 30 years before it would recover. And Weber County was indeterminate. In other words, they could not see a time when Weber County would economically recover from a closure. Now, things have changed a little bit since, but I don't think the impacts would be that much different. So we want to keep, as Kevin says, our eye on the ball here all the time.
Absolutely. Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, and I think you know this, Devin, the administration has not asked for a BRAC for the past 2 years. Before that, for about 3 years in a row, the Department of Defense and the administration did ask for a BRAC process because there is some excess infrastructure across the Department of Defense, and that's what drives the BRAC requests. So for the last 2 years of the Trump administration, there was no ask for a BRAC. It's hard to tell what will happen with the new administration. The folks within the Department of Defense that were asking for a BRAC 3 years ago are likely to ask for a BRAC again, and we'll have to see what the Biden administration does with that request, and then what Congress would do if there was a BRAC request. But having said that, I think Tage and I both believe that Hill's in a good place. If it should come to a BRAC, I think we would approach BRAC is that we would be a net gainer, that we would look to bring missions into Hill from installations that might be closed. So that would be our approach to it. But by the same token, we would have to keep our eye on the ball and make sure we were doing all the things we needed to do, both as an installation, as a community, to work to preserve that installation.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see. We'll know better probably after a year of the Biden administration, but I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that we'll see another base closure round.
Okay. No, that's good to know. And I'm going to take this opportunity. Guy Latender reminded me, we have up here at Weber State, we're doing a history project all about BRAC, and I'm sure you guys have both been involved with that. Sarah Langston is leading the effort for us, but not only is that helpful to sort of just analyze what has happened in the past, but also it could be helpful moving forward if we ever come to that crossroads again.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that's important and interesting that you say that we might be a net gainer, and we likely could be a net gainer in that process. So yeah, that's interesting. People don't often say it like that,
That would certainly be our intent. That's the way we would approach it.
Right. Yeah. It's not guaranteed, of course.
Right.
And we say it pretty quietly.
Yeah, I don't blame you. We want to make friends elsewhere, right? We don't.
Exactly.
We're not advocating for one in any way, shape, or form. But if there is one,
Right.
that would be our
Yes.
approach.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. And you sort of touched on where I wanted to go next. You talked about the incoming Biden administration. Outside of like the BRAC talk, how do you think that will affect Hill Air Force Base? Do you think it'll change sort of the day-to-day operations, or what are your thoughts? One rumor that had been going around is that they were considering canceling the GBSD contract with Northrop. I don't know how much stock to put into that. I don't know what you were hearing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I guess to some extent that all depends on what happens with the Senate.
Yeah, right.
I mean, clearly, I'm being serious. I mean, that could have a huge difference on what happens with regard to the Department of Defense. But what I'm hearing is that generally speaking, I don't think there's an expectation that there'll be a huge change in funding, if you will, which is the biggest challenge, funding for the Department of Defense. I think you're looking at flat defense budgets, or relatively flat defense budgets over the next few years. And that likely would have happened regardless of who the administration is, given all of the money we've spent on COVID relief and will spend on COVID relief, I think, in the future. So, and the Department of Defense is going to be the source of some of that money, I'm sure. The GBSD, there's no secret that there's a contingent of legislators out there who are not fans of ICBMs in general, who believe that the trident could be something, or the triad could be something else other than a three-legged stool. And that's just something we'll have to watch. I mean, those thoughts have been out there for a number of years, so that's not new.
Right.
I think generally speaking, every national defense strategy that's been conducted over the past dozen years have all validated the requirement for a triad. I don't see that changing. So I guess we'll just have to see. I think we have to be more careful with a Democratic administration with what's going to happen, particularly with GBSD over the next few years. I've heard nothing regarding canceling that contract, but we'll just have to be vigilant.
And I would agree with that. The only thing I would add is we do remember the time, and it wasn't very long ago under another administration and a different type of a Congress where we all remember the sequestration days on the national budget, and that equated to a double whammy to the Department of Defense, where it had to do with growth year over year and the stymieing of that, in addition to spending the programs that they had long term. And boy, it was devastating to the military. One of these days, when we have more time, we can talk about some of the numbers that are out there. Is the military today compared to the military, say, even during the Vietnam War? I mean, it's two different animals completely in terms of numbers and effect and part of the national budget. And so, and the only other thing I'd add there is that, yes, the Senate race is going to have a lot to do with it. And you will notice, regardless of the outcome, you'll notice that outcome in the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committee, where it's very political on which side of the aisle you sit, and the perspectives are, to me at least, shockingly different. And what the military's role is and what they ought to look like in the future. just extreme, almost 180 degrees amongst that one Armed Services Committee. And so it'll be fascinating to watch, but yes, Congress will have a lot to say about this in the next couple of years.
Yeah, no, that's true. One interesting thing to note, though, especially you sort of talked about the partisan makeup of the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee. After sequestration, there was actually a bicameral and bipartisan movement to sort of refund our military, because I think everyone realized that we did ourselves too much harm with those cuts on the military side. So it was a very, very bipartisan effort to refund things. So that.
Good point.
That's sort of interesting. So we're not going to have too much time to talk about this, but we talked a lot about Hill's economic impact and the impact that it has on northern Utah, especially. Can you talk about some of the missions that Hill Air Force Base has been a part of around the world and what we have done to enhance and further our national security? Because the economic aspect is nice, as you had mentioned earlier, but really the whole purpose of this is for national security and defense. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll touch on it quickly, and Kevin can give you a lot better detail than I, but just two things to point out. We've already talked about them both, but the GBSD program, this is the epicenter for the new missile system. That's a worldwide, all eyes are on the Air Force and their ballistic missile program, and that you don't get much higher visibility than that coming out of Utah. I think that's significant and something that we ought to pay attention to. If you go to the Pentagon, which I've had plenty of opportunities to do, and meet with our military leaders, there are two things that are on everyone's mind. I don't care which office you go into with the United States Air Force. There's two things, and one is the GBSD missile system, and the other is the basing of the F-35s. This is the first operational wing of the F-35s worldwide. This is the brand new aircraft, much argued joint fighter that was given to the Air Force, in the form of a wing. To do its first operations, and they picked Hill Air Force Base for that purpose. Not every community in the U.S. are seeing F-35s. It's very unique to us to see F-35s go overhead. There's a couple bases doing training. There'll be a couple other active duty operational wings coming up, going to other bases. But right now we're it, and everyone's aware of it. All eyes are on Hill Air Force Base for those two programs. I know Kevin has a better perspective of that than I.
Well, I just, in terms of the F-35, for example, we have had somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 people from the 388th and 419th fighter wings deployed for the last 2 years. Because if you need an F-35 anywhere in the world, you have to come to Hill Air Force Base to get it. So we've had those fighter squadrons, we've had people from those fighter squadrons and aircraft from those fighter squadrons deployed to Southwest Asia and other places for the past 2 years. No other base in the Air Force can say that, because no other base in the Air Force has operational F-35s.
Right.
And that was a big deal to be selected to be the first operational base for the F-35s. And I would point out that Hill Air Force Base was also the first operational base for the F-16s, which preceded the F-35. So we have a long history of firsts, if you will, when it comes to fighter aircraft. Tage already talked about the ground-based strategic deterrent, the GBSD. But I would point out for the past 40 years, Hill Air Force Base has been ICBM Central for the Minuteman IIIs. All of the testing that's done for any of the upgrades to those systems have been done on Hill Air Force Base for the past 40 years. The test launches that are done out at Vandenberg every year, where we actually test fire those rockets, all of the cleanup, all of the maintenance that's done after those flights to refurbish the silos, if you will, is done by Hill Air Force Base people. We have Hill Air Force Base people at every single missile base in the country who are doing maintenance out there as well. We have Hill Air Force Base people in the Pacific that run a small depot heavy maintenance operation in the Pacific. Hill Air Force Base runs what's called the Air Force Boneyard, where we store all of our older aircraft and periodically bring them back into use. either for our own use or to sell them to foreign countries. That's also people that are assigned through Hill Air Force Base in Arizona that do that work. So we not only do work from Hill at Hill, we do work from Hill all over the world. And there really isn't a weapon system in the Air Force that we don't touch. All of the landing gear work that's done for every service that's done within the Department of Defense is done at Hill Air Force Base. So there are a lot of Hill Air Force Base onlys out there that we could talk about, but it is a vital cog in the national defense apparatus of this country in many, many ways.
That's incredible. Yeah, the reach just blows my mind, and I think would blow a lot of people's minds as they learn more about what Hill provides for our defense. I have one more question, and then we'll wrap up. And this one's sort of shifting gears a little bit. Can we talk a little bit about environmental factors with Hill Air Force Base, air quality, access to water? Are there any things? What are the concerns there, and how can we improve those to make sure that Hill Air Force Base is sustainable?
Sure. I mean, this not pretend it's something that it isn't. The Hill Air Force Base is a large industrial complex, and they do a lot of technical work there and a lot of mechanical work there that requires what you might expect in any industrial complex, and that's anything from chemicals and solvents to machinery that have off gases and all that goes with that, and so. What the good news here is that I deal in the federal realm a lot with environmental issues, and the good news here is the Department of Defense has consciously taken an approach to be very proactive with their environmental mitigations and their environmental adherence to new laws, and that is not the case with private industry, and it's not the case necessarily. There are exceptions certainly, but. And that's not the case with all the other governmental agencies either, but the DoD has been very proactive, and I think it's going to pay off in the long run. As a manager over a utility that manages groundwater in the area, that's one that I'll just give you an example that there has been much ado about a new what they call an eternal chemical out in the environment. These are fluoridated, fluoridated compounds called PFAS and PFOS. You may have read about those in the newspaper. Some have referred to it as the next Aaron Brockovich chemical out there that folks might have real concerns about and possible lawsuits over. Well, that is a byproduct that largely was used in foams for fire suppressant. And those foams are used in airports, and also were used at Hill Air Force Base. Not anymore, but certainly were in the past. And instead of just hoping that doesn't get into the groundwater prism in and around the Hill Air Force Base, they've been working with us, with Weber Basin Water, to be sure that we're monitoring across the board, and even the shallow groundwater, which would precede the deep groundwater. To be sure that chemical doesn't show up. And if so, they already have mitigation plans to deal with it if it does. It hasn't yet, by the way, to put everybody's mind at ease. We've seen very little, almost negligible results of any tests we've taken in the groundwater. And that's good news. But I find the Air Force fairly proactive in environmental issues. Going forward. It's not to say it'll get any easier, because environmental law tends to only go one way. It stacks on top of what's already there and becomes more stringent as it goes along. And the federal process and the red tape that goes with it is numbing at best. But I found the base to be fairly proactive with it.
Yeah, that's great.
I would only add, Devin, that the base does have a fairly large, fairly aggressive environmental office on base. They work constantly with the state environmental folks. They have a great relationship with the state. And it's something they do take very seriously. I would also add that relative to this PFAS issue that Tage brought up, many other bases do have problems with PFAS. So, I mean, kudos to Hill for working with Tage and for taking that on, but that is a nationwide, that is a big problem. Not just Air Force bases, but international airports as well, where you have used foaming over the years. It tends to be a problem. But they are aggressive about it. They take it seriously, and they have a large office that works it.
No, that's good. Well, thank you both for the perspective on that question and on everything. You know, as the Walker Institute moves forward, I hope you will continue to think of us as partners. We want to maintain the awareness of the importance of Hill Air Force Base to our community and to our nation. So thank you both so much for joining us today. This was a fascinating discussion, and I hope the people that joined us, you know, got a lot out of it. So yeah, appreciate you. Tage, General Sullivan, thank you once again. And please, you know, stay in touch. Let us know how we can partner in the future. Okay.
Great. It was a pleasure, Devin. Happy holidays.
Thanks a lot, Devin. We appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. We'll see ya.
You bet.
Bye-bye.